Hello and welcome to the Trust and Influence in B2B podcast. I'm your host, Joel Harrison. As the title suggests, this podcast is a very broad remit. It's looking at all the challenges associated with generating trust and influencing buyers in all areas of B2B. And these are perennially tough challenges, but they've taken on a new urgency and resonance in what's a very fast-changing landscape. So episodes are released weekly, and please don't forget to subscribe, like, rate, or all of the above this podcast. We really appreciate your support and thoughts in kind of building it and getting it going to a much wider audience. So in this episode, in the build-up to B2B Marketing's Global ABM Conference, which takes place in November the 5th in London, which is the preeminent ABM conference in the world, I think, we're going to talk about ABM or account-based marketing, as you'd probably imagine from that build-up. And we're going to examine the deep and evolving role of trust in this strategic approach to marketing. And we're looking, and this kind of conversation will be based on some analysis of over 1,000 entries into the B2B Marketing Awards and the Elevation Awards, which are two awards programs run in the UK and US respectively. And who better to do that with than Robert Norum, who's one of the world's foremost advisors in account-based marketing. He's trained literally hundreds of ABMers, enabling them to hone their skills and be a better and more effective account-based marketer. And he's also the resident account-based marketing expert within Propolis, which is B2B Marketing's community for marketing leaders. So in this session, we're going to learn why it's critical to position your brand as a trusted advisor and how to do that. How to maximize the impact of customer advocacy within your ABM programs and to build trust, and how to balance this imperative to drive trust over a longer term with business-driven demand, and balancing with business-driven demand for short-term results. So lots to talk about. And Robert, great to see you. Welcome.
Good to see you, Joel. It's been a while.
It has. At least we haven't done one of these for a while anyway. So good to catch up, and really looking forward to digging into what you got, what your insights about the thing. This is your pet subject after all, right? This is something you're massively enthusiastic about.
Yes, without question. Some might even call me obsessive, but ABM is the thing.
Well, it's a great thing to be obsessive about. It is. It's such an area that's kind of transformed B2B. And over 10 years, we'll keep joking about. Can't remember how long we've been doing the ABM Global ABM Conference for, but every year it comes back bigger and better than the year before. So looking forward to it again this year.
Me too. Yeah.
So I did a bit of analysis. I've done a lot of analysis on the entries to the B2B Marketing Awards and the Elevation Awards, which are B2B Marketing's US awards program. And as I said, we've got over 1,000 entries over the last couple of years. And what it's showing, the kind of overall headline stat is that ABM has a 42% ROI advantage over other forms of marketing. And this stems from superior trust building through personalized experience and authentic engagement. Well, those are two of the things that it stems from. I'm sure Robert, you'd believe there's other things that it stems from as well, but those are fundamental things. But let's kind of dig into this. So I'll give you a chance to comment on that first of all. So you're not surprised by that, presumably.
I'm not surprised at all, Joel. As you might have heard me talking about for some time, I think for most enterprise organizations, ABM should be their primary go-to-market strategy. And the rationale for that is focus on the most important accounts and prospects, understand them, talk to them in their language about their needs and their problems, and how you can help them. And, why would that not generate a higher return on investment, if you like, than traditional push marketing?
Yeah, it's kind of where you have large contracts, it's a bit like, as you say, why wouldn't you do that? Because that's where the money's going to come from anyway. So
exactly, yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people who agree with you on that one. So let's dig into some questions now. So again, the kind of bedrock of this is around trust, right? That's the kind of point of the podcast, and trust is implicit in account-based marketing. And the analysis of the awards shows that ABM campaigns are saying 42% higher ROI than traditional approaches. So how does what role does trust play in account-based marketing? And tell us how fundamental is it in between in terms of how brands talk to these target accounts and these very, very valued customers or prospects?
Well, I'll start off, Joel, by saying that when I talk about ABM as how would you sum it up in one word, I have used the term trust before. So I think it is absolutely mission critical and axiomatic to the whole approach. And of course, what you're trying to do with any effective ABM program is to build trust, to build credibility, and to move from being just another vendor in the market to being somebody that the customer respects, wants to come to for advice and information. So from that point of view, I think ABM is absolutely front and center, if you like, in the trust landscape. And in terms of how they do that, or how we do that, it's about creating great content that's hyper-personalized, that's relevant. It should be based around insight, around the account and the industry and the people that you're talking to. And of course, if you can talk to them in their language about their problems, they're much more likely to trust what you're saying than just another vendor with another story.
Because it's maybe it was about a longer term, typically about a long-term strategic relationship, and trust is implicit in that, or you can't do that without trust. You might make an e-commerce transaction. There's a degree of trust associated with the product, but this is about trust all the way through the buying journey, right? With all of those, with at a top of funnel level, at middle funnel, and at sales level, you have to trust so many people in that organization. Okay, preaching to the converted here. And one of the things that one of the things I've been focusing on a lot in this podcast is around the role of thought leadership, and we found that 75% of ABM campaigns incorporated thought leadership in some degree or another. But this is much lower, much higher than in other forms of B2B marketing, perhaps more, say, transactionally orientated ones. Do you think it's because ABM forces companies to lead with expertise rather than product pitches?
For sure. It's all about building reputation. It's about third-party endorsement. So, the Gartners and Forresters and, G2s and all these different platforms have obviously become more and more influential in this space. And I think it's all about showing that you really understand the market, showing that you really understand the needs of the account, and then finding compelling ways to serve that up. And that is typically thought leadership content, whatever we mean by thought leadership. It could be a subject matter expert writing a great blog. It could be a white paper. It could be an introductory video. It could be all kinds of things. But I think that whole concept of how do we demonstrate that we really understand the customer's world and our role in it is axiomatic to the whole conversation.
And do you think there's a way in which this leading with this knowledge actually, instead of with features, just changes the dynamic in terms of the relationship? You're actually starting off on a different footing. You're trying to achieve potentially different things.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, back in the dark ages, when I was first trained how to sell, the first thing people said, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so do more listening than talking. And the whole conversation was always about discovery, before you even put a single foot forward in terms of what it was you're trying to sell. So from that perspective, I think really understanding the customer's landscape, their world, their needs, their competitive environment, the stakeholders that sit within their business, those are all really important. And once you've got that, that landscape, then you can start to find the right insertion points for how you talk to that industry, or how you talk to that group of accounts, or how you talk to that account. And in a perfect world, even how you talk to those individuals based around what you know about them.
Okay. So one of the fascinating aspects, or really powerful aspects of trust, is around advocacy. And the analysis we did of the ABM entries showed that 60% of campaigns used employee advocacy in one form or another, which is great. But only 25% used customer advocacy. Customer voices are incredibly powerful, aren't they? I know you'll agree with that. Why do you think people are using the customer voice, or are just not tapping into this kind of gold mine of she was mixing metaphors, a gold mine that's very, very powerful? That sounds a bit, you know what I mean? Powerful gold mine. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I did see that data point, and I was surprised by it. But I think if you think about it, there are probably 2 reasons for it. The first one is companies are often very controlling about what they want said about their company, their brand, their products. And of course, it's very difficult to control a customer. If they've agreed to speak for you at a conference or in video, how do you get to edit them and control what it is they're going to say? And what happens if they say something that you're not that keen on? So I think from that perspective, control is one aspect. From my own experience, though, I think it's probably more likely to the fact that it's actually just very difficult. An awful lot of customers might be happy to say something to you over lunch or confidentially, but will they actually go on record? And even if your stakeholders are happy to go on record, normally they say, oh, we better just run that by legal. And of course, as soon as that happens, everything stops. So I think there's an element of control. And I think probably the more prevalent rationale for why there are less or not as many, customer advocate stories as there could or should be is because it's just actually pretty difficult. And an awful lot of organizations just don't really have a plan or an approach as to how they would do that formally. And I think that's probably what's missing. It just feels too hard.
Yeah, that's really that rings so true, Robert. Barbara Stewart, we both know, is another one of the experts in Propolis, who's fantastic, very enthusiastic person, and as bright and enthusiastic as the wall behind you there, Robert, as I'm sure you know.
I've used the wall as a sort of Barbara replacement for me, Joel. Yeah,
it's a metaphor for Barbara, isn't it?
Exactly.
But I mean, we talked about this a while back, and she was saying that it's always treated as an afterthought, right? Because her domain is customer experience, right? So she's all about trying to leverage that and demonstrate it and deploy it within your marketing. It's always an afterthought, and we tend to feel like we have kind of only a handful of mechanisms that are kind of recognized. Case studies are popular, but again, they're quite used quite prosaically. They're not very flexible and dynamic. And we have NPS. We don't have very much else that the university used, which feels like it's this is tremendously powerful asset when in an incredibly valuable conversation, and yet the two things, we're not finding mechanisms to get over the obstacles you quite rightly identified and to join them up.
Yeah. I mean, I would go so far as to say that companies should almost build it into their contract terms, or at least give people a favorable incentive to participating in, contributing to really compelling advocacy stories. And who knows, is that a percentage point off the price, or is that some kind of value added contra deal? There are clearly different ways it could be structured, but I think it is an afterthought. It's not something that's built in from the get-go, and that's probably what's missing.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, actually, this leads on very nicely to the next question, which is around co-creation, because and this is, we used to talk about user-generated content, didn't we? That was a term which seems to have just vanished. Probably a good thing, but the notion of getting customers to co-create content seems like it's tremendously powerful. Do you think? I mean, we talked about what the problems associated with that is. How do you think it could be used, in account-based marketing? Do you think there's an opportunity for it? You said that you could bring people, essentially incentivize people to do it, but it is problematic. Do you think there's an opportunity? People should probably focus and try and do this more and bring it more into their ABM activities.
Yeah, I mean, I think without question they should do it more. In terms of how, I think very often it's about finding the ambassadors, if you like, or the evangelists or the advocates that you have within the business, and building a really strong relationship with them. And of course, all those people have careers as well. They're very keen to position themselves as being the smart people within their organization. And at some point, they're going to look for another job and go somewhere else. So I think anything that you can do to build that kind of trusted relationship where you say, we're doing a Talking Heads video, we're running a webinar, will you come and speak on it? We're at a conference, will you come and sit on the platform with us as one of our panel? Things like that, I think, can be very valuable. And perhaps somewhat ironically, in the context of what we're doing now, obviously podcasts have become, de rigueur, but also a great opportunity to pull in customer advocates who are happy to expand and talk about not just how you've helped them as a business, but their own skill set and credentials and abilities. So I think from that perspective, looking for champions within the business and then finding really smart ways to engage them in ways that don't feel intrusive, but feel actually engaging can be really helpful. I mean, you mentioned case studies. Obviously, they are a bit old-fashioned these days and a bit clunky, particularly if they're written case studies. But I think building out, video content, having really honest and authentic conversations with people in an environment they're comfortable with is also quite interesting. And that often is, when you're at an event and it's Chatham House rules and people are happy to come and be very upfront and honest about their experiences in a public environment.
Yeah, I think those are some great examples. And one of the ones I've heard of and used before, which seems to be quite effective, is kind of customer advisory boards, where you're seeking to bring customers in at almost a structured level rather than after thanks for the sale, tell us how it was, and then goodbye. It's actually more of a kind of it's building that notion of partnership, which I think is fundamental to ABM at the kind of top of the pyramid. Certainly, you need to keep customers close, and there's all sorts of benefits to that, but possibly they don't necessarily. If the business is too orientated around making the next sale or the next new logo, then some of those things are fall by the wayside. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I do. And I think, again, you come back to almost to what's the makeup of your team. If you think about most enterprise organizations, you've got people in marketing and field marketing, you've got BDRs or SDRs doing the development roles, you've got salespeople or account managers. A pretty typical role now is customer success. And I think customer success people should undoubtedly be tasked with that as part of their mandate. And it should be part of their KPIs, I think, which is how do you actually build long-term relationships with trusted customers who are prepared to join us, go on record, be part of advisory boards, whatever that looks like.
Okay, great stuff. So let's switch gear a little bit and talk a bit about personalization, because you mentioned that right at the outset. It's been becoming increasing. The opportunities to do personalization are growing as technology improves. But there's sometimes a bit of a tightrope. So we're seeing account-specific research and custom microsites, but there's sometimes a line between impressive personalization and creepy surveillance. So how do you personalize a way that builds trust rather than triggers privacy concerns? How do you find that line?
Well, I think generally speaking, you should be talking to the business about the business's needs and how you can help them, rather than talking about the individual and their psychographic profiling. I have seen companies in the past, track people on social media and find out they're very passionate about, Manchester United or some other random act of sports or whatever it might look like. And they have tapped into that. And sometimes I think people are very flattered by that and quite like the gifts or the incentives that they get offered. But I think that's where it starts to get a bit creepy. If you're following people on social media, looking for them to give away some snippet that you then respond to 30 seconds later, that I think is creepy. But in terms of, we really understand your business, we understand, the challenges you're facing. Perhaps there are issues with shareholders or profitability or problems with technology or problems with customers. If you can show that, that you understand that in an intelligent and whatever the right word is, emotionally intelligent way, you're not just shoving it down people's throats, then I think they will respect the fact that you've done the due diligence, that you've done the work, and that you understand them. If behind the scenes you can brief the salespeople to say, well, Bob, the IT director, is a tricky customer because he thinks this kind of stuff. And, Sharon, who's the finance director, has these opinions and has worked for these companies. Those kinds of things I think can be helpful, but I definitely don't think you would want to overplay those cards too publicly.
Okay, that's really interesting. You're pretty clear. Don't get personal, right? Don't take it personal beyond the workplace, right? That's the workplace is the dividing line.
That would be my take. Certainly until people start to offer you up the information. If they're prepared to engage with you and tell you personal stuff, then of course it's appropriate that you might use that at some point. But I think just stalking people on social media or even, of course, now using LLMs to find out stuff about individuals, I think you want to be very sensitive, if you like, to how that sort of information is used externally. As I say, how you use it internally is probably less of an issue because it's about informing your team and making sure they're really on point. So I don't think it's a problem. They understand the personalities of the people they're going to talk to, but I don't think you would then want to see that demonstrated in a piece of marketing collateral per se.
I guess it's a moving target as well, because different generations coming through might have different opinions. They might be, I don't know, they might be more sensitive to it than less. I don't really know what it is, but it feels like we're in this kind of this notion of how much we reveal about ourselves on something like LinkedIn is a great example. Feels like it's in flux. I'm never quite sure which way it's fluxing. It's probably not fluxing for everybody in the same direction, is it?
Well, that's an interesting one. Of course, if you're getting into, is it Gen Z now? I think we're talking about, and I never quite know whether it's X, Z, Y, or anything else. If we're talking about people post-millennium, let's call it that, then they may have different attitudes, and it may be possible to think about, reaching out to some of these individuals who are in their 20s via TikTok or via other means. As you can probably gather, I'm not in my 20s, so I'm probably less of an authority on that topic. But I think even there, it needs to be done with respect, not necessarily formally, but just not being too in your face about personal insights.
Okay. All right. I think it's good. That's wise words. So this is a marketing podcast, so we're contractually obliged to talk about AI.
Naturally.
That's really exactly. So apparently only 25% of the ABM campaigns that we were entered in the awards specified they used AI personalization. That's despite all the hype. I think that's probably an accurate number. Sometimes they might have used AI in a more administrative sense, which they wouldn't have bothered to mention, but if they're going to use it on personalization level, they probably should have mentioned it. So it's quite a low number, as I said, despite the help. Do you think companies are hesitant because AI-generated content might feel inauthentic? And how might you balance AI efficiency with a more human-level authenticity in order to kind of maintain trust?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's probably a sensitivity to using AI too widely in ABM, particularly if you're thinking at the top of that pyramid, one-to-one and one-to-few, where it really is about human interaction. I think AI has a whole raft of roles to play in ABM and very credible roles. I think the most obvious one is starting with that whole research and insight piece, where you can accelerate the process and you can now, churn through company profiles and even individual profiles so much more quickly. I mean, instantaneously in some cases, and definitely way less expensively. So I think the insight piece can be driven by a lot of AI, and that gives you the value, if you like, of how do we talk to these people. I think the idea that you would use AI to create primary content, your master content, is probably, I won't say naive, but I don't think it's a great idea. But I think once you've created that master content that has really been thought through carefully in terms of strategy, value proposition, messaging, then using AI to actually personalize that for different accounts, based around the research and insight that it's already produced for you, makes complete sense. So I think, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but AI plus human intelligence is kind of the order of the day. And the only question is, where are you using the AI and where are you using the humans? And for me, AI is about the ability to scale or to do things more quickly or less expensively, but it's not a search and replace for any kind of creative thinking or positioning or value development that I think humans should still be owning and driving.
Well, and that's all very wise words. I guess I always feel there's a greater degree of scrutiny around account-based marketing because inherently, particularly as the strategic stuff, because of the size of the deals are very high, and people, and that sense of trust is implicit. And so, if you're going to mess around with, we should all be playing with AI. Mess around is the wrong word. Apologies. We should experiment with AI because it is our world's evolving, both buyers and sellers. But you want to make sure your marketing lands as resonant and as trusted. Otherwise, what's the point? I would suggest.
I mean, I think if you were looking at a one-to-many play and you was perhaps saying we're looking at 500 accounts and we're using intent, then actually to be able to use AI to craft messaging. But again, I would still say based around a human master that you're then creating multiple versions of at speed and at scale using AI. But I mean, for example, if the salesperson was going off to a presentation and they were meeting 3 people, then you might plug in, well, this is the company I'm going to see. These are the messages I want to get across. Here are the individuals that I've done profiles on. How would you recommend I talk to individual number 1, individual number 2, individual number 3? And, the AI, the LLM is going to give you some insights. The question then is, you have to put your own interpretation on those insights. And I think, that has real value because it will churn out some thinking that's pretty credible, might be 80% right straight off the back in seconds. The question then is, how do you add the real value with the human 20% that you put on top of that? And when you get into that meeting, there's not just a question of regurgitating a bunch of noise at them. It's finding the right way to insert these interesting comments, observations, etc., into the dialogue in an appropriate way.
Okay, that's great stuff, Robert. Very, very wise words. So as well as with AI, we have to talk about sales because marketing and sales is the cause of, in my opinion, my knowledge, is the kind of partly the cause of why ABM is such a good idea, and it's also the biggest problem with doing ABM in the first place. So it's kind of cause and consequence. And trust. We're looking at building trust in ABM through things like thought leadership, and we're looking at being very careful about not destroying it through AI. But then there's this always seems to be a danger to me that when a salesperson gets a room with a client, they can slip into a traditional pitching mode. How do you maintain trust in that sales relationship at the end of the day? Or am I being unfair to salespeople? Our salespeople are always trying to drive trust as a foundational thing.
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I did actually start my career in sales, and I'd like to think salespeople are pretty smart. But of course, they are driven by making that sale. So I think for me, if we back up a little bit, the marketing and sales conundrum in ABM is of course is as old as the hills, and everybody's been talking about it for at least 15 years, if not longer. I think ABM is about breaking down the silos across the board, not just marketing and sales. BDRs, SDRs, customer success, delivery teams, sales ops, rev ops, all of these teams should have a common agenda and a common understanding. And I think ABM is actually the glue that can pull all that together. So from that point of view, I think there's a bigger picture thing than just marketing and sales. But if I try and answer your question directly, Joel, I think it's about information. It's about information and insight. So if we do some great research, it should be shared. If we create the strategy as a team together of how we're going to engage an account or a sector, everybody should know what that strategy is and have bought into it. If we're going to create the value proposition and messaging, this isn't marketing doing this in isolation, it's doing it with the wider team. And then when that creative and content arrives, there's no surprise. It's actually, well, there might be a sort of smile of pleasure, if you like, but that nobody's surprised at where we've got to. And when we start to land that content, the first thing we need to do is to be producing sales enablement materials like presentation decks and collateral that they can use in their meetings and as leave behinds and so forth. So for me, everything should be connected. People should understand why it exists and what it's based on. And then I think that the sales teams need to be respectful of that. If they're super experienced salespeople, then they probably know this already. If they're younger and maybe they do need some training or social selling guidelines or things that would be appropriate that marketing can help with, or other parts of the organization. So I don't think it's a sort of a simple one of saying, oh, well, marketing produce some great content and then sales go in and forget all about it and go for the hard sell. But I do think this is about everybody understanding, well, what is our strategy? What's our approach? Why have we selected these accounts? How do we go to market? How do we connect everybody up so we're all talking to the same tune, the same language? And then, if you like, having complementary skill sets or complementary communication activities of the difference between what a marketing team are doing or a bunch of SDRs or the account managers or even customer success to existing customers.
And as any self-respecting or self-disrespecting former print journalist, you're always looking for a villain, and the sales is the easy target in so many areas. But I think one is so a very nuanced response there, Robert. One of the areas I think where I feel like there's a more ability to connect up with some of those, particularly thinking about thought leadership, is like things like interactive calculators and interactive content, and where you can actually take some of the insights that you created kind of upstream and bring those into the sales conversation so that it's all connected and it's part of a bigger narrative, bigger story. And I've been looking for those in the awards entries. I'm not seeing as many of them as I might like to. I always feel like sales enablement fails to kind of move on in the way that I want it to, but it feels like a way in which perhaps that kind of those good intentions of trust building and narrative and storytelling can come all the way down to that conversation. So that, I'm not suggesting that salespeople will necessarily strive to get it wrong, but they were given perhaps an easier pathway to get it right.
Yeah, I mean, I think without throwing the challenge back down to marketeers, I think maybe marketeers could be more imaginative about the things they produce for sales in that bucket that's called sales enablement. There's one thing saying, well, look, here's a series of emails and here is a series of blogs and here's the presentation and here's a really nice leave behind. Those are fine, but they're all relatively mechanical and relatively repetitive. So the question then is, well, what could we be creating for sales teams, for BDR teams that would be more compelling?
Yeah.
I think a lot of that starts with the insight piece around, well, who are these customers and what makes them tick and what how and why do we think we can help them? But then what else could we do?
Yeah.
I was talking to a young colleague recently, and he has developed a platform for gamification, which is all about getting the sales teams to engage in different ways, using gamification where it's become highly competitive internally. And I think that could be an interesting angle on this sort of thing. Your point about calculators and tools, you don't see them very often, frankly. And again, I think one of the reasons for that is they are just pretty difficult to produce,
And they might even see it between the grey area, who owns that and who they're doing it for, So it's that, that's a conversation for another time probably, but I appreciate your points on that one. If we're going to talk about sales, we have to then talk about metrics, don't we? It's the next thing to talk about. And I think one of the problems with trust is that traditional metrics like clicks and conversions don't really capture trust development. They're not designed to do that. It does feel like, I had a conversation at a round table, a channel discussion last week about MQLs, and it's this metric that won't die. People are still using it, even though we recognize that a lot of the reasons it was invented for are kind of obsolete, but it's a handy thing that people can use. Sometimes it gives an indicator or anything else. But so how might, is there a way of measuring trust building process in ABM programs? What leading indicators might we use to suggest that genuine relationships are forming? Any thoughts?
Well, it's not a trivial one, that's for sure. I mean, I would say the base tier of any ABM measurement for me is internal trust, which is the collaboration piece. And again, breaking down the silos. So I think if marketing and sales and all the other stakeholders I've mentioned trust each other, you're starting to move in the right direction. In terms of how you then build trust, I mean, I think that, again, it starts from that insight piece. If you can talk to customers and prospects about their world in a way that they recognize, that feels that you really understand them, that's the first step to creating trust. And that then drives your content, which enables you to be much more authoritative about the things that are going to be important to the customer. And if you land a series of communications over time, and each time that customer or prospect sees that, they go, these guys get me, or this is really credible, or that was a fantastic case study, or something that really resonates with them, I think that builds trust. From there, you obviously move into the personal side of, the human side of sales and marketing, which is, SDRs and BDR teams, I think, are absolutely critical because they're the people on point who are starting to create the first dialogues, and they need to be referring back to really high quality content, and they need to be pulling people in to interesting things like webinars or roundtables or thought leadership pieces where real conversations are had and where, again, you're building that credibility and trust. And then, of course, you get to a point where perhaps it's the first face-to-face sales meeting, and that salesperson walking in the front door, to your exact point, needs to be on point, representative of the brand, really well prepared, understanding all of the research, insight, content that's gone before, so they can pick up on it. If they walked in and said, hello, John, want a new motor? Clearly that would have undermined everything that we've done. So whilst I think that's very unlikely, I think we need to make sure that everybody's joined up. And all of those things cumulatively, I think, build trust, and it is almost like a pyramid, layer on layer, each one of those things does stuff. And back to your, the horror phrase of MQLs, obviously we're not just serving up content to get somebody to click or download or open. What we're trying to do is to get them over time to engage with a whole cumulative set of content. And the content isn't just physical items or emails or digital comms. The content is actually how it's delivered by the BDR and by the salesperson. That's just it's verbal content, right? As opposed to, visual content, let's say, or audio visual content.
Yeah, absolutely. We're open. And I think that it's a very, very hard question. I've been banging on about trust for about a year now. And I think it's fundamental, but it is a very, very, it's almost impossible to measure tangibly, but it's intangibly, nothing can happen without trust. So everything else, every metric that you could possibly have is enabled by trust. So you're seeing it in all those different areas by how you're successful you're being in engendering that. Robert, you and I we've talked for an awfully long time. We have a lot of questions I've jumped over because we answered them. But we haven't got much time left. So I've only got time for one more question for you. We could talk for a lot further. I'm sure we will in future.
We could, but we can always have part two.
We could do that. We're also going to talk with the Global ABM conference. Did I mention it's on November the 9th in London, and we'll both be there, eager to share experiences and perspectives. But my last question for you, Robert, is obviously you could talk about the future and the trust imperative in the future. So looking ahead, AI is going to make it easier to fake expertise and personalization. What does that mean for trust building? What does authentic ABM look like in an AI-saturated world? Brilliant example of this is avatars, right? Becoming more and more common. It allows you to put words into individuals' mouths who are compelling thought leaders, but they're not actually saying those things. So So, very hard question again, but what do you think that the future looks like for trust, for trust in this ABM world?
Well, yes, it is a big question. I mean, I think, if we're thinking ABM and we're thinking AI, then I think AI can do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of accelerating the process and getting us to information more quickly. And we should use that. I think from the point of view of building trust, in a credible way, I think you need to be inserting people into the conversation, and you need to have real thought, well thought through, creative content and messaging. And then I think you can personalize it to a considerable degree as we go through that, targeting accounts and people using the AI angle. So I think there's no question AI is going to play a really influential role in the development of ABM. But I still come back to the absolute basics, which is, how do we define what ABM means for our organization? How do we make sure the leadership team have really got it and understand the transformational power of what ABM can do for us, which is breaking down the silos, focusing our resources on the most important accounts and prospects, etc. And then how do we really make sure that the organization is all pulling in the same direction, and focused on the accounts that really matter? And that might be 50, 100, 200, 500, might be 1,000, but it's not going to be tens of thousands of accounts that we're targeting simultaneously. And if we try and do that, we're just using AI to do more demand gen, create more noise, and effectively, ignoring the whole rationale for ABM, which I'm not a big fan of.
No, I get that message loud and clear. Robert, great to talk to you as always. We're both going to be at the Global ABM conference on November the 5th. It's taking place in London. It's a fantastic day. If you're interested in this subject, if you're an ABM expert, it's definitely the place you need to be to meet up with your peers. Or if you're a novice or someone just starting out, it's a place to come to learn what this is all about. Well, amazing people like Robert are going to be there to answer your questions. So absolutely get your tickets now. And if you can use the code Joel25, you'll get a 25% discount as well. So Robert, thanks so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed talking to you as always.
It's been great fun, Joel. I look forward to round 2 at some point.
Well, likewise, I hope so. We can get that scheduled in. So, but if you've enjoyed this today, please give us a rating, give us a like, subscribe, it'd be more important as well. And there's a lot more content like this on the B2B Marketing, on the Trusted Influence and B2B podcast. But for now, for me, thanks for listening, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.